Welcome to our webinar, How to Free Yourself from the Fear of Vomit and Reclaim Your Life, a healing journey shared by therapist and patient. Our presenter is Ken Goodman. Hi, Ken. Thank you.
Hello there.
And we're so happy to welcome Kay, who's on the screen that is blurred out for confidentiality. Kay is a former patient who worked with Ken, and we're just so happy to have her join us. Thank you, Kay.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. These webinars are presented by the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which is the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety and depression. Our mission is to improve diagnosis and promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education, like this webinar, through practice, and through research. And please take advantage of all of the amazing resources on our website. That's adaa.org. On the website, you'll find a really wonderful list of treatment providers. Just click on Find a Therapist from the homepage. And also we have a free peer-to-peer online support group also from. And finally, you can support ADAA by making a charitable donation on the website. So let's get started. For our live audience, take a moment to find the Q&A link so you can type in questions for Ken and Kay. If you're on a laptop, look at the bottom of your screen near the center, and you should find a Q&A link. If you're on a smartphone, if you tap anywhere on your screen, you should see a menu pop up at the bottom of your screen that shows a Q&A link. So hopefully you can navigate for that. So for our live audience, feel free to type in a question anytime as we go. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. Now, for our audience that's watching the recording, you can email a question to webinars@adaa.org. So I'm really happy to introduce our presenter. Ken Goodman is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in the treatment of anxiety disorders and OCD. He's a member of the board of directors of ADAA, and he's founding director of quietmindsolutions.com. Ken just published a new book for overcoming the fear of vomiting. It's called the Emetophobia Manual. And if you're finding this webinar helpful, we highly recommend getting a copy of his book, which is available on Amazon. And again, that's the Emetophobia Manual. Ken has also authored and produced a 12-hour self-help audio program for anxiety sufferers. It's called the Anxiety Solution Series, Your Guide to Overcoming Panic, Worry, Compulsions, and Fear. And he also created a coloring self-help book, which is called Break Free from Anxiety. Ken lectures at universities and organizations around the country. In his practice in Los Angeles, he does individual and group therapy to help anxiety sufferers free themselves from debilitating fear. Ken's website is kengoodmantherapy.com. So let me turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Neil, for doing this, for hosting. And I want to thank ADAA for hosting this webinar.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I just want to start off by saying that we broke a record here. There are 321 people that signed up for this webinar. I think the previous record for an ADA webinar was 140, about 140 people. I point this out about the number of people who signed up because this is a phobia that is much more common than people think. No one has heard of it. Anytime I tell someone I wrote a book on emetophobia, they're like, "What's that?" They've never heard of this before. But it's actually much more common. Anna Christie, who specializes in the treatment of emetophobia in Canada, she has a website, I believe it's called emetophobia.org, and she has a forum there, and there's been over 260,000 posts on that forum. There's a few Facebook emetophobia groups. David Cousins in Washington has a group, I think it's called Fear Facers. There's another one called Emetophobia Support with over 6,000 members. So this is a pretty common disorder that no one's ever heard of. And if you're not a part of any of these Facebook groups, you probably have never met anyone with emetophobia. So I decided to invite a former patient who suffered with emetophobia on this webinar. And she's going to share with you what her experience was like, what her healing journey was like. I haven't seen her in treatment for over a year. We worked together for about 2 years, I believe. So, Kay, I really appreciate you being here. I know it's so helpful for people who suffer with emetophobia who've never heard anyone talk about their experience. So I really appreciate you being here today and telling your story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ken, for asking me to be here. It's really important for me to share my story because I'm proud to say that I'm recovered from emetophobia, and that is something, man, I never thought that I'd be able to do. I've had this fear since I was 10 years old, and it has continued throughout my life until treatment with you.
How old are you now?
I am 32.
32.
So
Can you share a little bit about your what you were like before you started therapy?
sure. So when I first approached you, I was probably at my lowest point in life. The emetophobia had become so pervasive that I literally couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The fear was so strong that I was terrified to eat food and fear that I would throw up. So that was a really big safety behavior for me throughout the years to cope with my anxiety, was to not eat. And as the fear grew, I ate less and less until it came down to me losing 20 pounds in a matter of a month. I was severely, severely underweight and barely eating like 500 calories a day. And
And
I
the
knew
fear
that
was that if you ate, you would throw up.
exactly. It felt really safe for me to have an empty stomach wherever I went because, I'd get anxiety or doing just everyday things. And if I had an empty stomach, to me, that meant feeling safe from throwing up.
And I
And
think
it
you
just got
you
worse.
didn't really go too many places, did you?
I didn't, over the years, it got worse and worse that I started avoiding places. First it was traveling. I hated getting on airplanes and driving far distances. And then my world became, smaller and smaller to, you know, not being able to drive more than a couple miles away from my apartment, not being able to walk around the block. Um, because I was so terrified that everywhere I went, I would throw up. So my world became stuck inside my house, in my bed, unable to eat, unable to sleep when
And did
I
you
was
experience physical
positive.
symptoms of nausea or other physical
Oh,
symptoms?
completely. I got ulcers. I got terrible stomach aches, so incredibly nauseous from not eating. But in my emetophobia mind, I thought it was because of the food that was, making me feel ill. So I just ate less and less when in reality, the not eating is what made me feel so sick.
Hmm. And tell us how you are today.
Well, I mean, I feel like a completely different person. I don't feel like I'm that girl at all anymore. I can eat out at restaurants in front of people. I mean, I've gained 20 plus pounds, the weight that I lost back. I eat whatever I want, whenever I want. I don't even think about throwing up when I'm eating. I
I
don't look
remember,
like
I remember
expiration
after,
dates.
sorry to interrupt you. I remember when we, and towards the beginning of our working together, I went to your home and we went to a restaurant to
Yes.
try to eat. And you ordered avocado toast and it was like 3 pieces. And I think you ate half of one.
Yes. I just literally ate like the avocado on it, and I would just kind of take
Yeah.
the most minuscule bites.
Do
It
you
was
eat things now that you never ate before? Do you try foods? Do you eat at
absolutely,
restaurants?
absolutely. I became vegetarian when I was 18 for ethical reasons, but I think really the emetophobia was strong in that I was afraid of meat because I was afraid that undercooked meat would make me sick. And I'm going to start eating meat this year. I'm kind of transitioning. I'm eating fish to get my body, used to it. I never thought I would ever eat meat ever again. I try new foods all the time. I go to restaurants and I don't, ask the waiters, weird questions to like make me feel safe. I just eat. I eat without a care. I don't have to run to the bathroom during a meal and fear that I'm going to throw up and kind of calm myself down. I mean, I just enjoy the time with the people around me now.
And I know that instead of focusing on the fear, now you're living your life. So now you're driving places and you're in school and you're trips.
Traveling, I'm back in school. I dropped out of college because of my anxiety, so that was huge. I'm able to take a full load and doing really well in school and going back to work and traveling and being able to see friends and family, and I'm able to actually enjoy my life rather than just, I think the biggest thing for me was I was just surviving. Like that's what life felt prior to treatment, that I was like white clawing my way through life.
Yeah.
Every day was just getting through the day of such intense vomit thoughts constantly. And it was just, I wasn't present in life. And now I am fully present and able to enjoy life. And that is the biggest gift that treatment
Well,
gave me.
congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Everything that you accomplished, it's a magical transformation, but it was not magical. It took a lot of hard work. And I would imagine that when you started treatment, you probably, I don't remember, but did you imagine you could get better? What was your thought about did you have hope that you were going to get better when you started?
You know, I think treatment for me was like anything has to be better than the life that I am living now. I was so consumed with my fear that I honestly thought I was going to take it to the grave. I thought maybe, treatment will help me kind of get over it, but it will still be there because I'd never lived a life without it. So I couldn't imagine a life without it.
Okay,
I
we had a question about what age were you when this started for you?
10 years old. Yes, 10 years old. And I know Ken will get into, what kind of triggers emetophobia, and I'll speak on, that when we get there.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
congratulations. I'm super happy for you. Now people know that it actually is possible to overcome emetophobia, but it's a journey. And there are many things that prevent people from getting better. And that is what the beginning of this webinar is going to focus on, reasons why it's difficult to find freedom from emetophobia. There's more than three, but I'm going to focus on these three: resistance to doing exposures, unresolved vomiting trauma, and the fear of taking medicine. So we're going to talk about these. So let's talk first about resistance to doing exposure therapy. And if you watch the first webinar on this topic, you'll know what exposure therapy is. But if you don't, just very briefly, exposure therapy has to do with doing exposures. What are exposures? Exposures are basically facing what you are afraid of, exposing yourself to what's uncomfortable, exposing yourself to what's uncertain, and doing it in an incremental fashion. So for instance, if you have a fear of other people vomiting, you might start off with pictures of cartoon characters vomiting, and then move up to maybe pictures of babies spitting up or animals vomiting, and then do this incrementally until the point where you can watch videos of adults throwing up. but it's done in a very incremental fashion. And of course, there's a lot of resistance to it because doing exposures is terrifying. It's uncertain. And when you have emetophobia, the primary fear is that if I do this exposure, I might throw up or get nauseous or get anxious or have a panic attack. Kia, you can really relate to this, yeah?
Yes, I can. It was really hard for me to start doing exposures, but thankfully, exposure is like a ladder. You start with the smallest and you get to the hardest. And I think the key is doing it repetitively. That was, I think, what really, really cemented my recovery is that I was so determined to get over this because I wanted a better life that I was like, you know what? This is like school. This is like school for emetophobia. I'm going to do it every single day, and I'm going to do it like 3 times a day, not just once a day. And I committed to doing the exposures. And it was really hard at times, but every time that I would overcome, steps on the ladder, I would feel so much better. And I felt like I was chipping away at the fear every time I kind of graduated to the next exposure. And that's what really kept me going.
Right. But resistance to doing exposures or doing exposures infrequently keeps people from making progress.
Yes.
Exposures are uncomfortable. It makes you anxious. So there has to be a willingness to be anxious. Progress is slow, particularly if you don't do the exposures frequently. But even if you do them frequently, progress still can be slow. So it requires a lot of patience and persistence. And the process is really fraught with doubt. People worry that even if I do this, I'm still not going to get better. And why should I put myself through all of this if I'm not going to get better anyways? And every time you do an exposure, there's doubt. I mean, you can't walk into anxiety's territory confident. There's always going to be doubt when you do these exposures. So you have to be willing to do the work regardless of that doubt.
I have a question for Kay. Kay, in looking back at your recovery work, how important for you was doing this exposure therapy steps that Ken is talking about?
Oh, I mean, it was night and day. I mean, I had been in therapy for about like 8 months prior to seeing Ken. And it was just talk therapy. And I was actually getting worse with my emetophobia. And my prior therapist encouraged me to start doing exposure therapy. And I kind of knew that I had to, but I was terrified because, like Ken said, the fear is, you're going to do these exposures and you're going to throw up. You're going to be exposed to vomit. And I just was absolutely terrified to do that. But we did it so incrementally that I learned that, that doesn't happen. And that's not the point. The point is to overcome the fear. And the exposure therapy, I believe, is the only way to overcome the fear.
So when
Did you ever
say
throw up?
increment,
Did you ever?
No, never, not even close. Not even close.
so when you say incrementally, are you talking about starting out with really small?
Yes. I remember the first exposure was literally me just saying the words, writing the words, vomit, throwing up. I couldn't even say the words or write them down.
Oh yeah, she couldn't even say the words puke, barf without feeling anxious.
Yes. And that
Can I just make a quick comment for all of our viewers that watching this webinar qualifies as an exposure?
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does, especially with us saying the words.
Right.
100%.
Oh, I also wanted to make a comment for people that are typing in questions. We are going to be able to get to some of your questions. We're also going to save the questions that you typed in, and we'll do our best to address them on the ADAA website. So don't be too disappointed if we don't get to your question during the webinar.
I want to say one other thing about resistance to doing exposures. If you can do exposures, that's great, but you want to be able to do exposures in the correct way. So in the book that I wrote, Emetophobia Manual, I talk about how to do exposures. It's not good enough just to do the exposures. It's how you do them. Anyone could, hit a tennis ball, but with a tennis racket, but it's how you do it. You have to do it correctly. And if you do it incorrectly, it's not going to turn out well. So you don't have to believe that you're going to get better, but you do have to do the work. So even if you are doubtful about the process, continue to do the work anyways. The other thing that keeps people stuck is unresolved vomiting traumas. And there's various types, and usually vomiting traumas are experienced as a child or teenager. A vomiting trauma can be anything from a continuous vomiting episode where you have the flu or maybe food poisoning and you're throwing up all day or 2 days, painful or loud vomiting, vomiting on yourself and feeling disgusted, or vomiting in public and feeling humiliated, having a panic attack while vomiting. This is actually very common to feel. I mean, no one likes to vomit, but if you experience a panic attack while you're vomiting, now the vomiting is associated with anxiety. So, and that can be with anything. If you have a panic attack when walking into a teddy bear store, now you're going to associate teddy bear stores with panic attacks, and you're going to be anxious to go into a teddy bear store. Being yelled at for vomiting can be very traumatic. Witnessing a loved one vomiting, and vomiting associated with a disease. So I have a patient now who, when he was a child, his father had cancer and went through chemotherapy and was vomiting quite a bit, and then eventually passed away. So he associates vomiting with death. And even though as an adult he intellectually knows vomiting does not mean death, for him it feels like he's going to die. So we have to deal with these unresolved vomiting traumas. Kay, you want to share a little bit about what yours was?
Yeah, so I definitely had a vomiting trauma at 10 years old. I remember it ever so vividly. When I first entered treatment, I couldn't even talk about it because it brought up so much anxiety and emotion. But I ate Jack in the Box. I was so excited about that cheeseburger, and it was during the E. coli outbreak. Jack in a Box, I should have known better. And I got violently ill that night. And it was kind of like the first time I consciously remembered vomiting. And it was really, really traumatic for me. I definitely had a panic attack during it because in the months kind of after it, I would panic every night because I thought I was going to throw up. And I was so young, I didn't understand. So every night I would just lay awake in my room, just panicking and terrified that I was going to throw up. And I think that is really how the fear integrated into my brain.
Right. And when you have a vomiting trauma, it can impact the healing process. The memories of the vomiting trauma can be intrusive and interfere with daily life. They can be triggered by a sensation. So if you feel nauseous, suddenly you're remembering what happened 20 years ago, or an experience might trigger it, like a location might trigger it, or even doing an exposure. If you're trying to do an exposure and you're having flashbacks of a memory from 10 years ago, that's going to make it difficult to do the exposure. Memories can also surface randomly, just out of the blue. And memories themselves can trigger physical symptoms of anxiety and fears of vomiting. So if you suddenly have a memory of a trauma, now you're feeling anxious, maybe now you're getting nauseous, you get that fear of vomiting just from something that happened 10, 15 years ago, or even longer. And the memories can cause avoidance, safety behaviors, compulsions. If you have memories of a trauma at someone's home, maybe you're going to be reluctant to go to people's homes. So it can really interfere with your life. And to conquer emetophobia, the vomiting trauma must be healed.
Let's see if we can do a quick poll for our live audience of how many people can relate or can remember something that might have been for them a vomiting trauma. And while we're waiting for people to answer the poll, we got a question that came in for you, Ken. is there always a vomiting trauma if I developed emetophobia?
Not necessarily. You don't have to have a vomiting trauma. People can develop a fear and a phobia based on their thinking, their thoughts. If they start to worry about throwing up, even without a vomiting trauma, and then focus on that fear and then feel nauseous and then worry about throwing up, the cycle will begin. And it's a vicious cycle that escalates, where you have a thought, the thought creates anxiety, the anxiety creates nausea, the nausea creates more fear, then there's more avoidance, and voila, the fear begins and escalates. So there does not have to be a trauma.
If there is one, it's important. Oh, so we got our poll results. Almost 50% can remember a vomiting trauma. So this sounds like a really important part of the recovery work.
Right. So all those people who've had a vomiting trauma need to deal with it. So let's talk about how we do that. All right, so this is the vomiting trauma slide. So we're going to get into what you can do. Healing the vomiting trauma, memory re-scripting. So in order to overcome the trauma, there's a couple different things you could do, and this is one thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to write your trauma in the present tense in as much detail as possible. So you're going to write it as if it was happening, not like it happened years ago. So for instance, if you experienced a trauma in the middle of the night and you woke up in the middle of the night, you'll be writing, I'm 9 years old and I'm waking up and I'm feeling a sensation in my stomach. So you're going to write it in the present tense in as much detail as you possibly can. And then you're going to write it again, but change the ending. So after you've gone through the trauma, your present day self, possibly your adult self, is going to enter into the scene. So now you're going to be using your creativity here. Your present day self, your adult self, is now going to enter the scene, and you're going to comfort the traumatized self. And you can use your imagination and your creative writing to do that in any way you want. Like, what does your traumatized self need to hear? And once you do that, you're going to read both stories out loud, and you really give yourself permission to experience whatever emotions you experience. So it's oftentimes very difficult for people to do, and they feel a lot of emotion. It feels very difficult, but that's okay. Just allow yourself to experience whatever emotions you experience, and then read each story twice a day until that trauma no longer disturbs you, until you're kind of bored from the story, actually. So maybe, Kay, you can share with us a little bit about what your experience was like doing this.
It was incredibly healing. This had been something that had plagued me for 20 something years that I couldn't even talk about. So at first it was really, really hard to write it out. And I remember I was like bawling, crying while writing it. I think it was 20 years of trapped emotion also that I was setting free by healing the trauma. Because yeah, some other things happened within my family that kind of, compounded the vomiting trauma. So it was really, really healing.
And I remember you did not want to do this.
I did not want to do this. I was afraid that by talking about it, it would make me throw up. I think another really big fear of mine was, well, if I'm okay with throwing up, then it will happen all the time. So I kind of wanted to stay scared. I wanted to stay fearful because I think that I felt the fear is what made me feel safe, made me feel like I had control over it. And I learned that that's completely untrue. And by me taking control of the fears, like I actually have more control over my life because the fear doesn't control me anymore.
And once you did this exercise, well, let me go back. Before you did this exercise, were the traumas making it difficult to do exposures?
Absolutely. They were very intrusive. I would have flashbacks all the time, doing any sort of exposure. Um, so it made it very difficult because it felt like I was back there to being 10 years old every time I did it. And it felt like a wound. Um, and so by doing it, it felt like I was healing the wound. And now talking about it, my memory, it's not traumatic anymore. It doesn't feel painful. It just feels like a normal memory.
Right. It made it a little bit easier to do exposures.
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Good. And by the way, when you do memory rescripting, when you do exposures, it doesn't doesn't go perfectly smoothly. I mean, even think about this webinar. I had my dog barking. I couldn't advance the slides. You just kind of have to roll with it. You just sort of keep going.
We have a
Now,
wonderful question that came in
yeah,
for Kay. A viewer in the live audience says her daughter is a young teenager and they're both struggling. And she wanted to ask Kay if she's willing to share, how did your parents respond and what could they have done that might have been more helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this a lot. 20 years ago, mental health wasn't talked about. I'm really proud of, the advancements that, the mental health conversations are now in 2021. But, back in the 90s, people didn't know about phobias. People didn't really know about anxiety. So me being 10 years old and unable to express my fear, was really challenging because I didn't understand what was wrong with me. So I just stopped eating because I, again, thought, well, not eating means not throwing up. So my parents took me to doctors and stomach specialists. I even, at 10 years old, had to drink one of those radioactive drinks and get my stomach x-rayed because I wasn't eating and I was severely underweight. And the doctors were like, nothing's wrong with her. And I look back and I really wish that the doctors had maybe suggested to my parents that this was, an emotional issue, not a physical issue, because I wasn't able to express what the fear was. And I was almost afraid to say it because it seemed so silly to me. Um, so, my advice for parents is to really ask questions, and get to the emotional core of it, because I really wish that my parents had, no fault on their own. They were trying to do the best they could, but asking the right questions, I think, could have helped me, find a right therapist a lot sooner. So I
I
hope
think
that.
also parents need to be aware that this is like a real fear. It might seem dumb to you because, you know, no one likes to throw up, but people aren't afraid of it. But if you have this phobia, it's terrifying. And you have to really be able to validate that person's feelings. Like, okay, this is a terrifying thing for you. And I don't get it because I don't have that phobia, but I have to respect it and we need to do something about it.
We have a question, Kay, also about your recovery. And actually, a couple of similar kinds of questions came in. At this point in your life, if you went through some experience, I don't know, say food poisoning or an illness, where you actually did vomit, what would that be like for you in your life today?
That's a really good question because I looked at treatment as kind of preparing me for that moment because, I kind of had to face that someday I am going to throw up. And, we'll get into medication in a little bit, but when I started on different antidepressants, that was a really huge fear of mine that they were going to make me throw up. And I did get sick. I'll spare you the details, but I didn't vomit. But I felt like I was going to a lot of times.
Kay,
throughout.
why don't you share? You had a recent experience you told me about having a
Oh yeah,
migraine.
I had a migraine, a really, really bad migraine. And I've had them throughout my life. And this one made me incredibly nauseous. And I kind of just woke up in bed and I got up and I started gagging. And normally, if that had happened prior to treatment, it would have gone into full blown panic attack. I mean, just panicking and doing everything I possibly could to make myself stop throwing up. I'm sure all of you guys understand that. Have all your safety behaviors in doing that. But instead, I just took myself into the bathroom, kind of sat by the toilet. I had, a little bit anxiety, but I felt so sick that I was ready for it. I was like, I just want to feel better. And unfortunately, it did not happen, but I was so proud of how I handled it. I mean, that was like, okay, I am recovered. As long as I don't have a panic attack while I'm, on the verge, then I'll be okay. Because I think the biggest takeaway in recovery is learning that you're going to be okay, that you will be able to handle it. And, it will be uncomfortable, but we'll all survive.
Yep.
Wonderful. Congratulations, Kay. What a
Thank you.
wonderful story of recovery. Another question. This is one for you, Ken. In explaining to a family member or maybe a counselor or therapist explaining to their client, or if I'm the client and I'm reading your book and you're saying I should do this memory rescripting because I have a vomiting trauma, why is it helpful? Like what's going on when I do this rescripting exercise? How is that going to help heal that old trauma?
Yeah, good question. So you have to remember that anytime there is a fear, if you want to overcome that fear, you have to face it. Well, we can't, the only way to face the past is to write about it. You can't go back and change it. So in order to face any fear, so let's say a fear of elevators, you got to get in the elevator and you got to do it repeatedly. So what you do is you write the story in the present tense and you read it over and over and over and over. And by doing that, you're facing it. And you'll notice that over the course of time, weeks, month, that it doesn't really bother you anymore. So you're becoming desensitized to that story. Now, if that doesn't work, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. If you can find a therapist who does that, that is very effective. But that usually has to be done in an office. So you have to go into the office. And then if there isn't an EMDR specialist in your area, on my program, the audio program, the Anxiety Solution Series, I have an exercise which is very similar to EMDR, and that can be very helpful. So if the memory rescripting doesn't work, you can try one of these too. All right, so fears of taking medication. Boy, when you have emetophobia, there is a huge fear of taking medicine. The number one fear is it will cause you to vomit. And it is enough to make people not want to take medicine, something that's going to be really helpful for them. But other fears include cause other side effects, cause dependency, and will change your personality. In over 30 years of working with thousands of patients, not one of them has ever vomited because of taking an antidepressant. Now, I know that, but you won't know that until you actually try.
Let's try taking another one of these quick polls.
Okay.
Our live audience, how many people can relate to being afraid of taking medication? Oh, there we go. Are you afraid to take medicine?
Right.
That's
And we're talking
has to
specifically
say.
about antidepressants are the main medicines used for anxiety. But oftentimes people are afraid of taking any kind of medicine, even if for a physical ailment. So,
And we got quite a few questions that came in on this topic.
and Kay, you want to share your experience about medicine, your fear?
Absolutely. I think I had gone, quite a while with you without medication, and it was difficult. I was making progress, but I couldn't ever really solidify the progress. And you kind of explained to me that medication was like training wheels. It was just kind of help you, it was to support you, basically, support you to be able to do the exposures. Because I was having a really hard time with being consistent with the exposures because the anxiety was so strong. And I realized, okay, I'm putting in the work. Why not at least try to get a little bit of help? But I was absolutely terrified because I knew the possibility was vomiting. And, I had to try a couple different medications and different dosages. Like it wasn't easy. Um, and I didn't feel great for, a couple of weeks, but I never threw up. Um, and honestly, it completely changed my life. It absolutely 100% made recovery possible. I was able to finally do the exposures with anxiety that was tolerable, and I was able to commit to the exposures to be able to do it every single day, multiple times a day, and it completely changed my life. Like, I'm such an advocate for medication now.
It doesn't take away the anxiety completely,
No.
but it will reduce the severity, the intensity, the frequency, the anxious, so the anxious thoughts aren't as there quite as much.
Yes, the intrusive thoughts, that was the number one thing that changed for me. I could finally use the tools that therapy was teaching me and win, win against the anxiety.
Right.
So we got the results of our quick poll, and almost half can relate to that fear of medication.
Yeah.
So a really important issue for a lot of people.
Apparently, when we do these polls, it stops my PowerPoint.
Okay.
So we'll have to share again. All right.
Here's a one that Kay and Ken both might pitch in on. This is from a parent that's trying to help her young daughter who's 12, who just is so afraid that she is just not going to go to the therapist. Ken, do you have any advice on that one? A parent trying
she's afraid to go to the therapist?
Says sounds like it. Yeah, just the daughter's refusing to go. Probably because that would be a scary experience, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. I mean, anytime you have an anxiety disorder and you enter therapy, it's scary. And, you try to do it gradually. Like, all right, well, let's not have a therapy session. Will you just at least, and right now it's over Zoom because of COVID, but can you just talk with a therapist for maybe like 5 minutes or 10 minutes just to meet the person? So you kind of maybe do it that way, just kind of slowly introduce it.
Come up with a small step.
Yeah, I remember Kay telling me she was really anxious to start.
Yeah. Here was a question for Kay. Really interesting question. Was there something that you remember that like really got you to start seeking therapy?
Yeah, I mean, I was at such a low point in my life. I realized, my life could either be this every day, not eating, not sleeping, not being able to leave my house. That could be my life. Or I could try something that could potentially give me a better life. Like, anything has to be better. Like, I was at my breaking point. I was at the moment where anything had to be better than the life that I was living. But I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I remember my first session with Ken, I woke up at like 6 a.m. and just pure panic, pure absolute panic. Because I was so afraid that he was going to make me do these exposures that would make me throw up. And I quickly learned that that is not the case. But he did make me face my fears. And it's hard, but it is
not right away. It was not right away.
It was not right away. No, absolutely not.
And I know you had thoughts about even canceling an appointment. Imagine
Oh,
now you'd still
yeah.
be in the same boat if you did cancel the appointment.
Oh my God, yes, I would I would come up with so many excuses, and I would email him and, call him, and he would be so kind and patient with me and really convince me that this was going to be okay. He was going to help me and we would get through it together.
So medication becomes necessary if any of these following happen. So if anxiety is so high that your food intake is minimal and your weight is very unhealthy, it's necessary if you're unable to do the exposures correctly or on a daily basis. In other words, you're so anxious that you can't really do them correctly or frequently. And if you are utilizing the strategy that's in the book and doing the exposures properly and sufficiently for 6 months, but you're not getting better. So you're doing everything right, but you're really not getting better. So instead of asking yourself, what if medication makes me vomit? Ask yourself a more productive question. What if medication eases my suffering and helps me get better? So how do you handle the fear of taking medicine? Well, you meet with a psychiatrist, um, as opposed to, let's say, a primary care doctor. Meet with a psychiatrist. Do not Google side effects, because I'm pretty sure it's going to say vomit, but I don't know. I've never Googled. But as soon as you see that, you're going to be reluctant. And start with the smallest dose possible, the teeniest, smallest dose. Sometimes they come in liquid form, so you can really start small. Take them as directed. So if it says eat with food, eat it with food. Be aware that nausea and other symptoms may not be side effects. So you might experience what you think are side effects. You might experience nausea, you might experience physical symptoms, but they're not side effects. They're actually you feeling anxious. So you have to be really aware that what you're experiencing physically may actually not be a side effect. It's really anxiety. And then, but sometimes you do get side effects. And sometimes those side effects are temporary, like your body is getting acclimated to the medicine. And you have to tolerate the side effects and sort of push through, hang in there for a week or two. That, of course, I mean, if the side effect is so severe that you can't, then that's a different story. And then you'll slowly increase the dose at the recommended pace. And you have to be willing to alter or add another medicine or increase the dose. So, Kay, do you want to share anything about your process, what it was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started at the lowest of the low. I mean, like half of the lowest. It took a really long time to get me to you know, a dose that was therapeutic because I tapered on so slowly. But for me, that was the only way that I was willing to try it. So that worked for me. And I did Google side effects, so I was a bad patient. And I looked up all sorts of things. So
Was
uh,
that helpful, Kay, to Google side?
no, no, not at all, because I just panicked. I had so much anxiety that I couldn't tell if it was from the medication or if it was just my anxiety. It was my anxiety creating the so-called quote unquote side effects. So do not do that. And if you taper so slowly, you're really going to be okay. And
But
uh,
remember, if you go up slowly, you're prolonging your
yes,
recovery.
yes,
So
it does
typically,
take
you
longer.
it does take longer. You just have to be aware of that. I mean, typically psychiatrists will start you off on a medicine at a certain dose and then increase the medicine a week or two later, and then possibly increase it again. But if you take 2 or 3 months to increase the dose, it's just going to take longer.
True. I guess, yeah, it really depends on what, you're able to do. If you're able to just kind of jump on there and get through it, then you'll feel better a whole lot sooner.
Right.
Here's a question for you, Ken.
Yeah.
So if I fall into this category where to make progress, it really is going to help me to be taking one of these medications, and I do the work and I, do good exposures and accomplish a good recovery. Does that mean I will always have to be on medication? Or if I wanted to, could I wean off in the future?
Yeah, good question. And the answer really is unknown. I usually recommend that people stay on the medicine for a minimum of 6 months once you're doing well. So if you have a period of at least 6 months of doing really well, not having anxiety, then you can begin to slowly come off, like very, very slowly. But you have to remember that as you are slowly coming off, you need to increase the strategies and the tools of how you got to that point. So you have to continue doing the work even as you're slowly tapering off. And if you notice that your anxiety starts to increase again, then maybe you'll just go back on that same dose. But sometimes, I don't know, you will come off the medicine and be okay.
And then just to review
It's worth a try. It's definitely worth a try.
And then just to review what you've already said about medication, if I'm able to do the exposures and start to see progress, then I'm probably in the category that doesn't need the medication.
Right. If you're at the point where Kay is, where you're eating at restaurants, you're driving all over the place, you're living your life, and then you slowly come off the medicines, there's a good chance that you will be okay, but maybe not. And so we don't really know. So I want to I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I just want to remind people to please donate. These webinars are free, and the ADAA is a great organization. Even a $5 or $10 donation, if everyone here does it, it really helps the organization. That is how ADAA operates, is through donations. So please do that.
So we have a number of questions, but before we cover some of the questions, I just really want to recommend to our audience as the next step to get Ken's book. If you found anything useful here on the webinar, again, get a lot out of his book. It's called the Emetophobia Manual. It's on Amazon. And I just wanted to read one line from my own review of his book. This is your roadmap to freedom from emetophobia. Ken Goodman is your experienced, expert, and compassionate guide. Ken, do you want to say a word or two about the book and what people might get from the book?
Yeah, people don't make change by learning new information. You make change with experiences. So I tried to make this an experiential book where there's exercises. I include QR codes, which lead to all types of videos and pictures, that are not only exposures, but also inspirational videos. So you can experience the growth as long as you are doing the work. So you do the work, you go through the chapters one by one, step by step, you experience the whole process, and it certainly helps if you are working with a therapist who knows about emetophobia or specializes in anxiety. But I think if you just use the book on its own, there is a really good opportunity if you really study it. So collaborate with the material. Don't just read it, take notes, and really study it and work. And
We've got a number of questions about motivation, which I'm really pleased to see those questions because motivation is so important. Does the book help people with motivation?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on motivation, actually.
Okay.
So absolutely, yeah. If you're going to do this work, you have to be motivated. Like, you have to want to get better. You have to really want it. It has to be greater than at least equal to the fear. You have to
And
be
if
really
I'm not sure, say I'm just not working with a therapist yet, and if I'm not sure how to really get started with exposures, is the book going to give me some tips on that?
Yeah, it's very detailed. It lays out exactly what you need to do. It gives you opportunities to practice, starting from the teeniest, tiniest little exposure, and then working its way up to stuff that's really hard. But you start off with things that are a little easier. And some people, the stuff that I talk about in the beginning, not even the beginning, maybe chapter 6 or 7 or 8, don't even make them anxious. So That's okay. You just keep reading until you get to that point where, okay, this exposure is kind of rough. This is going to be a hard one.
Oh, here's a really good question. We have just a few minutes left. Um, uh, Ken is also an expert on OCD, and we had a couple of questions about, could you comment, is there an overlap between emetophobia and OCD? And could you just say a word about people that might have symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, some people have, I mean, a lot of people with emetophobia are obsessed. So do they have OCD? Maybe, maybe not, but they certainly are obsessed with vomiting. And oftentimes that leads to compulsions where they can compulsively wash their hands excessively, check expiration dates, do all sorts of things in a compulsive way. And there is a chapter in the book on that as well. But Kay, I think, can talk about that as well. I think you were pretty obsessed.
Yeah, when I first saw my psychiatrist, she said I had OCD tendencies. So I think they kind of all, I have panic disorder, emetophobia, a little bit of OCD tendencies, even was depressed because of my, I had it all. So yeah, the vomiting phobia can definitely lead into obsessions. Like you said, I would compulsively look at expiration dates. I would wash my hands a lot. I wouldn't touch food unless I knew that my hands were washed. So while I didn't have repetitive compulsions, I did have things, I guess, that, in your mind, I had intrusive thoughts. So yeah, I would say that it kind of all overlapped for me. And I find that really common in support groups as well.
We have a question about, how do I find a therapist? And well, I guess my first thought would be, go to the ADAA website, ADAA.org. Ken, any suggestions there?
Yeah, you really want to find a therapist who specializes in anxiety. So it treats anxiety exclusively. So ADAA.org has a search button there. You can find a therapist in your state. IOCDF.org, International OCD Foundation. Um, and usually the people in these two organizations will know what to do. Hopefully they have some experience with emetophobia, but even if they don't, they are at least knowledgeable about how to help people with anxiety. And you can go to their
Wonderful.
website too. If you go to their website and you see that they talk about everything under the sun, anxiety and depression and self-esteem issues and marital issues, then you know that person does not specialize in anxiety. So go to the website and see if that's what they talk about. If it's only anxiety and OCD, then they pretty much know what they're doing.
Let's do one more question, because we've got several questions about safety behaviors, and what is a safety behavior, and should I be doing more of them or less of them, or is it covered in the book?
Yeah, that's definitely in the book, Safety Behaviors. Kay, you want to share some of your safety behaviors? Eating slowly, eating very slowly.
Eating very slowly. I wouldn't finish all the food on my plate because I was too afraid that if I ate too much, that would make me throw up if I felt full. So I always wanted to feel kind of an empty stomach. I mean,
Not
not
leaving the
eating
house, not leaving the house until the food has been
was
digested.
digested. Yes, I had a fear that if I left the house and the food wasn't digested, that I'd be so anxious I'd throw it all up. Um,
Bringing
a
things with you, right? Did you bring things with you?
gum, water. I kind of would breathe in certain ways. I'd swallow a lot. Um,
So
yeah.
these are all things that keep people in their mind safe. And what you slowly want to do is gradually eliminate those safety behaviors, slowly eliminate them. And it's
Why do
hard.
we
So
want? Why do I want to do that? As if I'm
if
working on.
you rely on those safety behaviors, then you get to keep your anxiety disorder. So you have to be free. You can't be dependent on them. So pick the safety behavior that is the least challenging. I'll give you an example. So let's say you have to wait 2 hours after you eat before you leave the house. So maybe you'll start by saying, all right, I will leave the house after 1 hour and 50 minutes, and I'm just going to walk outside, just to maybe down the block. So you start really gradually. and you do that, and you do it every day, and then maybe you go on to, I'll leave the house after an hour and 40 minutes. And so you're sort of gradually letting go of the safety behaviors. The safety behaviors, in your mind keep you safe, but they also keep you trapped.
So if I'm gradually reducing my safety behaviors, can I call that an exposure?
Absolutely. It's an exposure. And once those safety behaviors, you're not encumbered by them anymore, now you're free. You don't have
This
to.
goes back to what you were talking about, how it's important to do the exposure work correctly. And what
Yes.
I'm hearing is that learning about safety behaviors, identifying the ones that I'm doing, and then gradually weaning off them is part of that exposure work.
Yeah, and it's not just doing it gradually, it's the mindset. In the book, I go into quite a bit about the mindset of how you approach doing exposures and
So
how
should I
you
do
deal
exposure by gritting my teeth and
No, no,
right?
no. We don't want to white knuckle
What's
it.
a good mindset?
Well, in the book, I talk about having an offensive mindset, and so it's pretty detailed, and it's important that you face your fears in a certain way, and so it's going
Okay.
to be really helpful for you to get through them.
So on that note, and then also we got a couple people that wanted to get the name of the book again. So it's the Emetophobia, Emetophobia, the Emetophobia Manual.
That's on Amazon.
Right on Amazon, right?
Well,
I
thank
have
you
the
very
link in the
much.
chat for everyone if they'd like to grab it.
What did you say?
I have the link to the book in the chat for anyone who'd like to grab it.
Right. And then also for our live audience, if you've sent in a question, we only got a chance to get to some of your questions, but we're going to do our best to address a lot of these questions on the ADAA website. So thank you, Ken. Thank you, Kay.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It was great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for watching the webinar. Please like it and share it. And feel free to email questions to webinars@adaa.org.
And please donate if you felt like this was helpful to our organization.
So bye for now, everybody. We'll see you.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.